His wife tossed out the words carelessly. "I'm not coming home tonight. Don't wait up." But she had no idea what was coming. What he found in her purse confirmed his worst fears, but it was nothing compared to the meticulous, devastating revenge he was about to set in motion. Ryan had never been so thrilled to clock out early. He had braced himself for another exhausting night shift, but a last-minute schedule change meant he was free to leave by 11. Grinning, he practically bounced to his car, eager to head home and surprise his wife, Ava. He could already picture her reaction, the way her eyes would light up when she saw him. After a long day, all he wanted was to unwind with her. Since Ava wasn't expecting him until morning, he decided to make the night extra special. On his way home, he stopped to pick up a bottle of wine and a bouquet of flowers. But the excitement faded the moment he pulled into the driveway. A strange feeling crept up his spine. Ava's car was missing from the garage. The house was completely dark. Something felt off. Maybe she had stepped out for a quick errand. But as he stepped inside, the eerie silence gnawed at him. Frowning, Ryan pulled out his phone. After a few rings, she finally picked up. "Ryan?" Ava's voice was flat, almost irritated. "Hey, Ava, where are you?" "I got off work early," he said, his voice still carrying the excitement from before. A long pause followed. Then, her response came, cold and indifferent. "I'm not coming home tonight." Ryan blinked, thrown off by her words. What do you mean you're not coming home?" A sharp sigh came through the line. "Do you need me to say it again?" Ava snapped. "Did you not hear me the first time?" His stomach tightened. "Ava, what's going on? Why aren't you coming home?" "I have something important to take care of," she said coolly. "Just leave me alone, all right? I'll be back in the morning." Ryan stood frozen, his pulse quickening. This wasn't like her. Ava had never spoken to him this way before. So distant, so dismissive. Confusion quickly turned to anger. "Ava, this is unacceptable. You don't just disappear like this. We'll talk about it later." And with that, the call cut off. Ryan stood there in the dark, his mind spinning. The next morning, Ryan sat at the kitchen table, his jaw tight, waiting. As soon as he heard the hum of Ava's car pulling into the driveway, his heart began to race. The front door opened, and she walked in, looking completely unbothered, as if last night hadn't happened at all. She barely spared him a glance. "Morning," she said casually before heading toward the stairs. "I'm taking a shower." No explanation, not even an ounce of guilt. She was just acting like everything was normal. The tension in the room was suffocating, but he held back for now. Let her think she was in the clear. Then, following a nagging gut feeling, Ryan stepped outside and walked over to her car. As he slid into the driver's seat, he noticed the dashboard screen still glowing. One address immediately stood out. 251 Oakwood Drive. That was on the other side of the city. Why would she have spent the night there? Ryan searched every inch of the car, the trunk, the glove compartment, even under the seats, but found nothing suspicious, nothing that could tell him who his wife had been with. Frustrated but determined, he headed back inside the house. As he stepped into the dimly lit living room, his eyes landed on Eva's purse, casually resting on the entryway table. A sinking feeling settled in his chest as he reached for it. Slowly, he unfastened the clasp and peered inside. There, nestled among her usual belongings, was an open box of rubbers. One was missing. Ryan stood frozen, his breath catching in his throat. For a moment, he just stared, his mind going blank. He hadn't seen one of these in their home for years. There was no need. And yet, here it was, undeniable proof of something he wasn't ready to face. There was no mistake. He knew exactly what Ava had been doing. Then, finally, he heard the water stop. Ava came down the stairs, her hair wrapped in a towel, looking refreshed, as if she hadn't just ripped his world apart. She glanced at him, but something in his expression made her pause. "What?" she asked, her tone immediately defensive. "We need to talk." She rolled her eyes. "About what now?" His voice was steady. "About where you were last night." Ava stiffened, her arms crossing over her chest. "Are you seriously doing this right now?" "Whose house is 251 Oakwood Drive? Ryan asked, his eyes locked onto hers. For a split second, something flickered across her face. Guilt? Defiance? He couldn't quite tell. But then she straightened. It's Owen's house, she said flatly. Ryan's stomach twisted. Owen? The guy from your office? Yeah, Ava said, holding his gaze without a shred of hesitation. I stayed the night there. Ava's voice was eerily calm, too calm. Ryan clenched his fists, trying to keep his temper in check. You think I'm stupid, Ava? His voice was sharp, laced with barely contained anger. You spend the night at another man's house, I find rubbers in your purse, and you expect me to believe nothing happened? Ava's eyes narrowed, her expression unreadable. So what if I stayed there? She shot back. It's not what you think. Ryan scoffed, his frustration bubbling over. Then what the hell is it? Tell me, Ava. Are you sleeping with him? Ava let out a slow breath, her defensive tone softening, but not in the way Ryan had hoped. No, Ryan. Owen isn't my lover. Ryan's patience was wearing dangerously thin. Then explain it. Why were you at his house all night? And don't you dare feed me some ridiculous excuse. I deserve the truth. Ava finally dropped her arms, her expression shifting from irritation to something colder, almost detached. I had some problems at work, she said. Owen helped me. He covered for me in front of our bosses. If he hadn't, I might have lost my job. Ryan's jaw tightened as he studied her, waiting for the real explanation. I went to his house to thank him, she added. Thank him? Ryan's voice was edged with disbelief. So what? You shared personal moments with him out of gratitude? Ava didn't flinch. It was my idea, Ryan. Owen didn't ask for it. I knew he was attracted to me, and I decided to give him something in return for helping me out. Ryan felt his blood run cold. His whole body tensed as the weight of her words sank in. You gave him something? His voice wavered, caught between disbelief and fury. You mean you? He stopped, unable to even say it aloud. You shared personal moments with him as some kind of payment? Ava's expression remained maddeningly calm. Yes, she said simply. It wasn't cheating, Ryan. It was just a transaction. A voluntary, honest deal. No feelings involved. Ryan stared at her, his mind reeling. He had no words, no way to process the sheer absurdity of what she was saying. You're telling me, he finally managed, his voice shaking, that you sold yourself for your career? Ava didn't even blink. I gave him a little happiness in return for helping me, she said matter-of-factly. That's all. Ryan's breath uneven. Ava, he whispered, how could you possibly think this is okay? She shrugged, completely unbothered. It was a professional courtesy, Ryan. He did me a favor. I did him one. That's it. Ryan felt like the floor beneath him had crumbled. Ava's eyes flickered toward the bouquet of flowers sitting on the counter. The same bouquet Ryan had bought for her the night before, when he was still a fool who believed in them. A small smile spread across her lips. Wow, honey, are these for me? She stepped toward them, brushing her fingers over the petals with admiration. You're so good to me, she murmured, not even waiting for his response. Then, she turned her attention to the bottle of wine he had brought home. Without hesitation, she popped it open, grabbed 2 glasses, and poured them both a drink, like this was any other night. Like she hadn't just admitted to betraying him in the most calculated, heartless way possible. Ava handed him a glass and raised her own in a casual toast. Ryan, I'm sorry, she said lightly. Maybe I acted stupidly, but let's just forget about it and move on. She took a slow sip of her wine, watching him over the rim of her glass, waiting for him to do the same. Ryan sat frozen. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, his pulse pounding in his ears. She wasn't sorry. Not even close. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking him to pretend this never happened, to sweep it under the rug like a minor inconvenience. Let's just forget about it, Ava added with a casual shrug, as if she were suggesting they ignore an overdue bill. Ryan couldn't respond. Ava continued as if nothing had changed. His grip tightened around his glass. Then, in one swift motion, he drained it and stood up. Without looking back, Ryan walked outside. The betrayal stung. But what hurt even more was how little she seemed to care. She expected him to accept it, to play the role of the devoted husband while she carried on like nothing had happened. But Ryan wasn't that kind of man, and Ava had no idea who she was dealing with. If she wanted to play games, fine. He would play along for now, but not the way she expected. The longer he stood there, staring at the quiet street, the clearer his plan became. Ava thought she had made a fool of him. Let her believe that. But before she saw those divorce papers, before she thought she could walk away from this unscathed, he would make sure she felt the weight of her choices. Not with screaming, not with rage, with something far more elegant. A slow, calculated revenge. One she wouldn't see coming. Ava thought she was in control. She believed she had played her cards right, that she had manipulated the situation to her advantage. But she was about to learn what it truly felt like to be outmaneuvered. Ryan stood on the porch, his mind whirling with ideas. It was time to speak to a lawyer. But first, he had a surprise to plan. Ava had made a critical mistake. She had exposed her greatest weakness, her career. If she valued her job so much that she was willing to betray her marriage for it, then that was exactly where he would strike first. But before setting his plan in motion, he needed an airtight alibi. Something that would place him far from home, completely beyond suspicion. Taking a deep breath, Ryan squared his shoulders and headed back inside. He had to play the part of the forgiving husband a little while longer. "Ava," he called as he entered the kitchen, where she sat sipping her wine, looking as if nothing had happened. She glanced up, her expression softening as she sensed the shift in his tone. He forced a small smile as he sat across from her. "I've been thinking," he started, keeping his voice measured. "Maybe you're right. We've been through too much together for one mistake to destroy everything." Ava's lips curled into a pleased smile, as if she hadn't expected him to cave so easily. "I knew you'd see reason, Ryan. We're stronger than this." He nodded. "Let's move on. I don't want to lose what we've built." Ava reached across the table, wrapping her fingers around his hand, her expression warm and satisfied, as if everything had fallen neatly back into place. But she had no idea she was playing right into his hands. The next morning, Ryan wasted no time. He arrived at work determined to take the next step. He walked straight into his boss's office. Greg, his manager, looked up from his desk. "Ryan, what's up?" Greg asked, leaning back in his chair, clearly not expecting anything out of the ordinary. "Greg, I need a favor," Ryan said casually. "I'd like to request a business trip to our production site in the next city. I think it's time for an inspection, and honestly, I could use the change of scenery." Greg raised an eyebrow. "A business trip? Now? You don't usually ask for that." Ryan shrugged, making sure to sound nonchalant. "Yeah, I've been under a lot of stress lately. I think it'd be good for me. Plus, it's been a while since anyone checked in on operations over there." Greg considered for a moment before nodding. "You know, I have been meaning to send someone out there. Could be a good opportunity for you. How long do you need?" "A week should be enough," Ryan said, already picturing how everything was going to unfold. "All right," Greg agreed. "I'll get the paperwork sorted today. You'll have everything you need by the end of the week." "Thanks, Greg. I really appreciate it." By the end of the day, Ryan had everything in hand. Signed paperwork, company authorization, and a perfectly legitimate excuse for his absence. His alibi was set. That evening, as he and Ava sat down for dinner, he casually slid the documents across the table. "Looks like I've got a business trip coming up," he said. "I'll be gone for a week, starting Monday." Ava barely glanced at the papers before handing them back. "A week, huh? Well, I guess I'll miss you," she said with a small smile. "But work is work, right?" "Exactly," Ryan replied, his tone even. She didn't suspect a thing. And that was exactly what he wanted. Over the next few days, Ryan put the rest of his plan into action. With his alibi locked in, he focused on finding the right people to help him execute his revenge. After some research, he found them, an event planning group that specialized in flash mobs and elaborate pranks. They had orchestrated everything from fake award ceremonies to surprise marriage proposals. This, however, was something different. Ryan met with them in a quiet cafe a few miles from his house, laying out his plan with precise detail. "So, You want us to stage a performance? One of the organizers asked, intrigued but slightly puzzled. Ryan nodded. Exactly. I need it to feel like she's losing control, like she's being exposed for who she really is, but in a way that makes her question everything. The group exchanged glances, their interest piqued. We can do that, one of them assured him. We've pulled off some pretty crazy stunts before. If you want her to feel the heat, trust me, we can deliver. On Monday morning, Ryan packed his bags, double-checked his travel documents, and kissed Ava goodbye as if nothing was wrong. She waved him off, completely unaware of what was coming. She believed everything between them had gone back to normal. She had no idea she was about to be blindsided. Like clockwork, Ava started her day with her usual routine. She stopped by the cafe near her office, just as she always did, stepping inside and inhaling the scent of fresh pastries. The familiar atmosphere soothed her, making her feel like everything was back in order. She placed her usual order, a coffee and a croissant, then stood at the counter, waiting as the barista prepared her drink. Just as she reached for her cup, a well-dressed man in a sharp business suit stepped up beside her. He glanced at her, as if recognizing her, then smiled. "Oh," he said in a voice dripping with exaggerated politeness. "It's you." Ava blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" The man's smile widened. "I thought I recognized you," he said smoothly. "You're the woman who, how do I put this, shows her gratitude to colleagues in a rather personal way." Ava's heart stopped. The words hit her like a slap to the face. She stared at the man, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup as a wave of panic crashed over her. "Excuse me?" Ava stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The man beside her chuckled, his smile polite, but his words dripping with something far more unsettling. "It's just so generous of you, really," he mused. "Not many people would be that giving to their colleagues." With that, he turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Ava standing frozen in place, her coffee cup trembling in her hands. For a moment, she just stood there, her mind struggling to catch up. Surely, this was some kind of mistake. Maybe he had confused her for someone else. Shaking it off, she grabbed her croissant and quickly exited the cafe. Her thoughts whirled, but she forced herself to move on. It had to be nothing, just a bizarre coincidence. The next morning, Ava found herself back at the cafe, though the encounter from the day before lingered in her mind. She had convinced herself it was random. People made weird comments all the time. It didn't mean anything. As she approached the counter to place her order, an elderly gentleman in a crisp suit shuffled up beside her. He turned to her with a warm smile, his eyes lighting up in recognition. "Oh, madam," he exclaimed, his voice filled with admiration. "I've heard about your generosity. Truly inspiring." Ava stiffened. "Excuse me," she said cautiously. "Such a noble sacrifice," the old man continued, nodding sagely. "Sharing your body to advance your career. Quite the feat of dedication." Ava's face drained of color. A pit formed in her stomach. What are you talking about?" she managed to whisper, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. The elderly man simply waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't be so modest. Word travels fast about people like you. So selfless, so accommodating in the workplace." Then, just like the first stranger, he turned and strolled away, leaving Ava standing there in stunned silence. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her coffee. This wasn't a coincidence. Twice now, complete strangers had approached her, making those awful insinuations. But how? How did they know? She walked to the office in a daze, the weight of paranoia settling in her chest. By midweek, Ava was on edge, her nerves frayed to the breaking point. She had tried to convince herself that the previous encounters were random, flukes, but deep down, she knew better. And when she stepped into the cafe that morning, dread wrapped around her like a suffocating fog. She ordered her usual coffee, glancing around warily. Just as the barista called her name, a young woman carrying a tray of drinks stepped up beside her, beaming brightly. "Oh, you're Ava, right?" she chirped, her voice laced with excitement. Ava hesitated. "Yes?" The girl giggled, winking playfully. "My friend works with you. She told me how kind you are." especially to the men in the office. So thoughtful of you. Ava's stomach lurched. She didn't wait to respond. Grabbing her coffee, she bolted from the cafe, her mind spinning. This wasn't random. Someone knew. And worse, they were spreading it. By the time she reached her office, she could barely focus. Her thoughts were a tangled mess of fear and confusion. Her hands shook as she fumbled for her phone. She needed answers. She needed reassurance. She dialed Ryan's number, her pulse pounding in her ears. As soon as he picked up, she blurted out, "Ryan, something weird is going on." There was a brief pause before he responded, his tone flat. "What are you talking about, Ava?" "People, strangers, they're saying things. About me. About that night." Her voice cracked. "It's like they know, Ryan. They know." Silence. Then Ryan sighed, irritation creeping into his voice. "Ava, why are you bringing this up again? I thought we agreed to move on." I know," she stammered, desperate. "But this is different. Someone's spreading rumors. Or are you involved in this?" Her voice wavered, laced with uncertainty. Ryan let out a sharp sigh. "Ava, seriously? You think I have time for something this childish? I told you, I've moved on. Why can't you?" "Ryan, please, Listen." He cut her off, his voice firm. "I'm busy with work. I don't have time for this nonsense." A second later, her phone buzzed as Ryan switched to video call. The screen lit up with an image of Ryan walking through a production facility, a hard hat perched on his head, a safety vest strapped over his shoulders. Machines whirred in the background. "See," he said, his voice clipped. "I'm here, handling real work. I don't care about the past, Ava. Stop calling me about this." Ava stared at the screen, watching him navigate the factory floor, looking every bit like a man too preoccupied with work to be scheming. Still, something didn't sit right. I'm sorry," she whispered, feeling foolish. It's strange." "I've got to go," Ryan said briskly. "Don't call me unless it's important." And just like that, the call disconnected. Ava sat frozen, gripping her phone, confusion swirling in her chest. Something was happening. Someone was pulling the strings. And then, like a sudden gust of icy wind, the realization struck her. Owen. He was the only other person who knew. Could he be the one spreading this? Or had he let something slip? Without wasting another second, Ava grabbed her purse and stormed out of the office. She moved through the halls, her pulse racing, her mind spinning. A few minutes later, she stood outside Owen's office. Inside, Owen sat at his desk, completely unaware of the storm about to hit him. Ava stepped into Owen's office, closing the door behind her with careful precision. Her voice was low, a sharp whisper laced with tension. "Owen," she hissed, leaning in so no one outside could hear. "Did you tell anyone about our meeting?" Owen looked up from his desk, confusion flickering across his face. "What? Ava, what are you talking about?" Her eyes narrowed. "You know exactly what I mean." A flicker of realization crossed his features, and his face paled. "About that night," she pressed, her voice razor-sharp. "Did you open your mouth? Did you tell someone?" Owen stiffened, his hands tightening on the edge of his desk. "No, of course not," he said quickly, shaking his head. "I wouldn't. Don't lie to me." Ava's voice remained low, but the anger in her tone was unmistakable. "If management finds out, we're done. You know the company's policies. No romantic relationships between employees. Are you an idiot? Do you have any idea what could happen to both of us?" Owen's eyes widened, panic flashing behind them. He raised his hands defensively. "Ava, I swear, I didn't tell anyone. Why would I risk my career over this? You know me better than that." Ava studied his face, her sharp gaze searching for any sign of dishonesty. But all she saw was confusion, fear, and sincerity. If Owen wasn't the one spreading rumors, then who was? She left his office without another word, her mind a tangled mess of disbelief and dread. The eerie encounters, the cryptic remarks from strangers, it was spiraling into something she couldn't explain. By the time she stepped out of the office that evening, her nerves were raw. Clutching a folder of documents to her chest, Ava walked down the sidewalk, her thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. Then, out of nowhere, a young man bumped into her hard, sending the folder flying from her grasp. Papers scattered across the pavement, caught in the evening breeze. "Oh, I'm so sorry," the guy said quickly, crouching down to help her collect them. Ava knelt down beside him, struggling to push down the frustration bubbling inside her. "It's okay," she muttered, her voice tight. "I wasn't paying attention." She reached for the last document, tucking it under her arm. "Thanks for helping." The man straightened, brushing off his sleeves. Then, with a smirk, he said something that made her blood run cold. "No need for verbal thanks," he mused, his tone smooth, almost mocking. "You can thank me with a night together. You know, for saving your documents." Ava's breath hitched. Her eyes snapped up, locking onto his, searching for any sign that she had misheard. "What did you just say?" she asked, her voice unsteady. The guy's grin widened. "Come on," he said with an easy shrug. "I can see it in your eyes. You like to thank men, especially when it helps your career, right?" Rage flared inside her like wildfire. "You sick bastard," she shouted, her voice trembling with fury. The guy only laughed, a sinister chuckle that sent chills through her. Then, without another word, he turned and bolted down the street, disappearing around the corner before she could react. Ava stood frozen, her entire body trembling. Everywhere she turned, someone was whispering about that night, mocking her, as if the entire world had somehow found out. That evening, Ava sat in her dimly lit living room, a glass of wine clenched tightly in her hands. She had barely touched her dinner. Her stomach was knotted with anxiety, her mind replaying the last few days on an endless loop. She lifted the glass to her lips, but even the wine did little to soothe her nerves. Her thoughts kept circling back to one terrifying question. Was someone deliberately tormenting her? Her fingers hovered over her phone screen before she typed into the search bar, "Psychotherapist near me." Either someone was playing a cruel, calculated game with her, or her mind was unraveling. Either way, she knew one thing for certain. She was standing on the edge of something she couldn't control. By Friday morning, Ava was running on fumes. She had made a decision. No coffee stop, no lingering on the street. She went straight to the office, hoping that drowning herself in work would make the nightmares of the last few days disappear. She needed to forget. She needed to move on. By the time her colleagues started arriving, she was already at her desk, furiously typing, pretending that everything was fine. For the first time in days, she felt a fragile sense of control. The office hummed with normalcy. The morning chatter, the clatter of keyboards, the routine of another workday. Ava exhaled, relieved. Finally. But her peace was short-lived. An hour later, the office door swung open, and a courier walked in, holding an enormous bouquet of red roses. A ripple of curiosity spread through the room. Heads turned. Conversations hushed. The courier, oblivious to the tension he had just created, strode toward the middle of the office and announced in a clear, bright voice, "Delivery for Ava." The words slammed into her like a freight train. Ava's stomach twisted into knots. All eyes were on her. Her co-workers exchanged glances, smirks playing on their lips. A few even chuckled under their breath. Ava pushed back her chair, her pulse hammering as she stood. Her fingers felt numb as she approached the courier, her mind screaming at her to stay calm. But deep down, she knew. This wasn't an ordinary bouquet. This was another move in the game. And whoever was behind it was getting closer. "I didn't order anything," Ava snapped, trying to steady her voice. "Why do you think these flowers are for me?" The courier shrugged innocently, then plucked a small card from between the roses. Clearing his throat, he read aloud, his voice ringing through the office. "For the sexiest and most divine Ava, who made me happy that magical night. Signed, Owen." A stunned silence fell over the room for a split second. Then, the whispers started. Murmured comments. A few outright chuckles. Heat rushed to her cheeks as her coworkers exchanged knowing glances, some covering their mouths to suppress their laughter. The judgment in their eyes was suffocating. Without thinking, she lunged forward, knocking the bouquet from the courier's hands. Roses scattered across the floor. "What the hell is this?" she screamed, her voice cracking with fury and humiliation. "What kind of disgusting joke are you playing?" Some of her colleagues were still laughing. Others just stared, wide-eyed, waiting to see what would happen next. Ava was spiraling. Owen wasn't even here to explain himself, conveniently absent, sent on an errand by the boss that morning. That only made it worse. She was losing control, and she knew it. And then, just when she thought it couldn't get worse, the door to the boss's office flew open. Mr. Thompson stepped out, his expression a mix of confusion and irritation. His sharp eyes darted between Ava, the scattered flowers, and the visibly shaken courier. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, stepping into the chaos. The room fell into hushed silence again, though the tension was palpable. Mr. Thompson bent down, picking up the crumpled note from the floor. He read it quickly, his frown deepening with each word. When he lifted his gaze, it was heavy with suspicion. "Ava," he said slowly, holding up the card. "What is this? What's going on here?" Ava's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her mind was scrambling for an explanation. Anything. But she had nothing. "Ava," Mr. Thompson pressed, his voice firmer now. "Did Owen really send you these flowers? Are you two in a relationship?" His gaze darkened. "You're married, Ava. And you know the company's policy." "No. No." Ava shouted, her voice desperate. "This is a setup. Some kind of sick joke. I would never." But the words lodged in her throat, suffocated by panic. Mr. Thompson watched her carefully. "If Owen is involved in this, I need to know now. Otherwise, you're putting your entire career at risk." Ava's chest tightened. "It's not true," she choked out, but even she could hear the weakness in her voice. I don't know what's happening. Someone is trying to ruin me." Mr. Thompson exhaled sharply, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Ava, you need to calm down." But she couldn't. Her colleagues were still watching. They didn't just think she was a scandalous woman. They thought she was crazy. Mr. Thompson knew he needed to defuse the situation before it spiraled any further. "All right, everyone," he said, raising his voice. "Enough staring. Get back to work." Something in her snapped. Her vision blurred with rage, her body trembling. "Yes, I slept with Walter," she screamed, her voice raw and unhinged. The entire office froze. Gasps. Hands clapped over mouths. Stunned, disbelieving stares. Without another word, she snatched up her purse and bolted toward the exit. Her sobs were the only sound cutting through the stunned silence. At that moment, Owen walked in and heard everything. He stood frozen, his face draining of all color. His knees wobbled slightly as he struggled to process what had just happened. His wide, panicked eyes darted around the room, meeting the stunned faces of their coworkers. Ava's confession hung in the air like a thick, suffocating fog. "Ava," Owen finally croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you say that? This was our secret." His expression was one of sheer disbelief, as if the ground had been ripped from beneath him. Mr. Thompson exhaled sharply, his expression now devoid of humor. "So, it's true?" His voice was heavy, laced with disappointment as he looked straight at Owen. "You were involved with her?" Owen lowered his head, his face ashen. I didn't tell anyone," he mumbled. "I swear I didn't." Mr. Thompson pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaling in frustration. "Well, that's it then," he muttered, his voice barely loud enough for the nearest onlookers to hear. Turning to Owen with a mixture of disappointment and authority, he said, "Owen, we need to have a conversation. Now." Owen followed Mr. Thompson into his office, shoulders slumped. Meanwhile, the rest of the office erupted into hushed whispers, exchanged glances, and barely restrained amusement. Ava's meltdown, her shocking confession, and Owen's pathetic reaction had sent the entire workplace into chaos. By Saturday, Ryan returned home, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. He had orchestrated part of Ava's downfall, but he hadn't expected things to unravel this badly in his absence. The moment he stepped into the house, he felt it, the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. He found Ava in the kitchen, hunched over the table, a glass of wine clutched tightly in her trembling hand. Her eyes were wild, brimming with something between despair and madness. The once confident woman he had known was now utterly broken. The moment she saw him, her expression twisted into something venomous. "You!" she shrieked, jumping to her feet. "You did this!" Ryan barely had time to react before she was storming toward him, her voice shaking with rage. "You set me up, didn't you? You planned all of this." Ryan took a slow step back, raising his hands in a calm, non-threatening gesture. "Ava, calm down. What are you talking about? I didn't do anything." But she wasn't listening. "You wanted to ruin me," she accused, advancing toward him. "You wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone." Ryan's voice remained steady. "Ava, I'm your husband. Why would I do that to you?" He kept his tone gentle, controlled. "Let's just talk, okay?" Ava's whole body trembled, her hands shaking violently. And then, without warning, she spun toward the counter. Her fingers closed around the handle of a kitchen knife. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. When she turned back, gripping the knife tightly, her eyes gleamed with pure, unfiltered rage. "I'll make you pay for this," she screamed, brandishing the blade. "You think you can destroy me and just walk away?" Ryan's pulse pounded, but he didn't panic. He remained calm, slowly backing away while slipping his phone from his pocket. "Ava," he said firmly, his voice low and soothing, "put the knife down." Her grip tightened. "You ruined my life, Ryan," she spat. "You made me look like a fool." His fingers moved swiftly over his phone screen, dialing 911 without breaking eye contact. "You're not thinking straight," he said, keeping his voice steady. "You need help." Ava's breathing turned erratic, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she teetered on the edge of complete madness. Moments later, the sound of sirens pierced the air. The front door burst open, and within seconds, police officers flooded the kitchen. Ava, still clutching the knife, screamed incoherently as they approached her cautiously. With careful precision, they disarmed her and restrained her wrists. Her face twisted in anguish, her words now an incoherent stream of jumbled nonsense. As they led her away in handcuffs, Ryan exhaled, feeling a strange mixture of relief and pity. It was over. At the hospital, doctors diagnosed Ava with a severe nervous breakdown. She was placed under temporary psychiatric care, leaving Ryan with the perfect opportunity to put an end to everything. While she was undergoing treatment, Ryan took the steps he had been planning for weeks. He withdrew a significant sum of money from their joint account, funneling it into a private one. With his lawyer's assistance, he finalized divorce papers, preparing for the last, ultimate stage of his revenge. When Ava was finally discharged and returned home, she found the house eerily empty. Then, her eyes landed on the kitchen counter. A thick stack of papers sat there, neatly arranged. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the documents, scanning the words. Divorce papers. A single note rested beside them, scrawled in Ryan's familiar handwriting. "Don't contact me." Ava's breath hitched. Her hands clenched into fists. "No, no, no, no." Days later, she managed to track him down, her voice filled with venom as she confronted him. "You stole from me," she hissed. "You drained our account. You have no right." But Ryan was ready. He met her gaze with icy calm, his tone devoid of emotion. "I didn't steal anything, Ava." He took a slow step closer. "But I will tell you this. Our home security cameras recorded everything the night you came at me with that knife." Ava's face turned deathly pale. "You're not getting a dime," he continued, his voice unrelenting. "You've lost everything, your job, your reputation. And if you so much as breathe in my direction again, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what happened." Ava wavered, her body shaking. She had nothing left. She knew he had one. With no other choice, she signed the divorce papers. Owen was fired. Ava lost her job. The scandal spread like wildfire, cementing their disgrace. Meanwhile, Ryan walked away, free from the nightmare she had created. His revenge was complete. It had taken patience, careful planning, but in the end, Ava had fallen by her own hand.